Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening and a happy Holi and a happy Pi Day and happy lunar eclipse and yes. Oh, too many celebrations. All right, so we are in the middle of reading about the Kurma Avatara, the tortoise Avatara, who saved the churning of the ocean, you could say, when things had to be churned out of the ocean so they could, the Devas could get the Amrita back out of the ocean. And after describing the particular story, he has gone into the description of how we can compare the microcosm and the macrocosm, how the individual person is a microcosm of the cosmic person. And so we are in that section at the moment. In the universe, or more correctly, in the cosmic self, we find that solar eclipses take place when the moon passes between the earth and the sun, thus hiding the latter from our view. Moon is the mind, and sun is the eye, representing all the senses of the cosmic self. So, during solar eclipses, the eye, or senses of the universal self, gets overpowered on account of the innumerable desires that make up the cosmic mind. Lunar eclipses, again, is caused by the shadow of the earth falling on the moon on full moon days, or, in other words, Earth overpowering the moon, as the object and its shadow are inseparably connected. Earth attracts everything towards it, and it is never without its attractions. Thus, during the lunar eclipse, worldly attractions overpower the cosmic mind. Hence, both the eclipses mean temporary incontinence on the part of the cosmic self. The duty of an individual self is therefore to be particularly cautious not to fall a prey to the demon of incontinence or Rahu, and in order to keep oneself safe from its evil effects, one should pray, meditate, repeat the names of the Lord after a good and purifying bath, and spend the time in a very holy manner, as there is a greater chance of one's falling into incontinence whenever the Supreme Self is under its influence. This I shall explain more fully. To take up the question of eclipses mentioned previously, what is an eclipse? We hear from our modern teachers that solar eclipses take place when the moon crosses the line that joins the sun and the earth, and lunar eclipses occur when the shadow of the earth crosses over the moon. But from our Puranas, which are the commentaries on the eternal science, the Vedas, we learn that the eclipse is caused by a demon called Rahu. Now, most people think that the latter view is a purely mythological or false one, but let us examine the assertion before we hastily arrive at a decision. Usually these mythological things have a symbolic meaning, and so he's going to do a very thorough job here of describing all of those symbolic meanings to the mythology, rather than just having people think that it's just some sort of made-up story to describe something they couldn't explain. If we study more deeply into the matter, we shall find that in reality both of these explanations are correct. One is materialistic and the other idealistic. Modern science looks upon the earth as soulless. According to it, all the works of nature are carried on by purely mathematical forces, by dead, blind forces. So modern science gives us a universe that is without life or soul, an inanimate and unintelligent universe. But the Vedas, or the eternal science, tells a different story. It tells us that the earth is a living thing. I have a body, and in that no one is living except myself. I am existing in the legs. I am existing in the eyes. It is I who exist in the ears, in the hands, in the limbs, and in every organ. Every portion of my body is pervaded by me. If I touch your leg, I touch you. If I touch your head, I also touch you, and no one else. Do I not? In the same way, this whole universe is pervaded by a soul, and in every part of it, this soul exists. There is no part where it is not. And just as this body is pervaded by one soul, and only one, so only one soul pervades the universe. Also, as the body works only so long as I am in it, as my presence is absolutely necessary in order for that all the functions of my body may go on. Similarly, the presence of God is absolutely necessary in order that all these works of nature may go on. Here lies the difference between modern science and our eternal science. One gives us a dead, soulless universe, and the other a universe pervaded with life and soul. And so that's a very wonderful analogy, really, when you're trying to remember that God is all-pervasive. You just think of it like yourself. You pervade your whole body. And so similarly, God is pervading the whole universe. And so that sanctifies and spiritualizes everything you do. Every time you're using anything in the world, you realize that God is pervading that particular object that you're using in the world. And it pervades every place you're going to put it and every kind of activity that you're going to put it to use in. So this idea of the all-pervasive soul in the universe is really a very useful one, especially in the practice of karma yoga, which, by the way, you can practice tomorrow if you come here for our karma yoga day. Oh, they canceled it? Oh, I'm always the last to know. All right. Now, which would you rather have, a dead body or a living body? Everyone would rather have a living body. Similarly, we would prefer to have a living universe. Take, for instance, our rivers, mountains, etc., the Ganga, the Yamuna, and the Kaveri, the Vindhyas, the Himalayas. To us, they are not mere streams of water or mountain ranges, but we regard them as gods or goddesses, each representing the same divine being, but in different names. Every portion, we must remember, is pervaded by that same soul, but we give different names according to the varying appearances and functions of the different objects of the universe. One part we call Kaveri, another Ganga, another Himalaya, but it is always the same soul under these different manifestations, just as the soul manifests itself as hands, legs, ears, nose, etc. in a person. So again, we find this in every ancient tradition, that various parts of nature are sanctified as something spiritual. Rivers are probably one of the most frequently sanctified objects in the environment because of the life-giving qualities of the river. Most civilizations sprang up around rivers because they needed the water for agriculture and for, obviously, their own personal drinking needs and hygiene needs and so forth. And so the sanctity of the river was really a way of acknowledging the life-giving force that comes from the river. And probably the second most common thing is some sort of axis mundi, some sort of highest peak in the environment of that particular civilization, which was thought to be the axis around which the universe revolved. And so again, it's really just a symbolic representation, but it's one that's very common. And Hinduism, of course, always combined the ideas of the one universal supreme being that's permeating all of these, whereas in some of the other traditions it wasn't quite so clear. Then sometimes it was thought more that there were really all these different kinds of entities that were controlling these different things in the environment. But in Hinduism, that wasn't the case. But where it was the case, then you find that the monotheistic religions would tend to take over, and then the indigenous religions would tend to be forgotten. But the same wisdom that's in Hinduism was also in those earlier religions, just not as clearly put forth. We must not forget that the same soul is everywhere. The same soul that is in the sun is also in the earth, and the earth has the quality of attracting everything towards it. The sun is a sentient being in the same way as our eyes are sentient, so long as we live and we have seen that the sun is the eye of the universal being. So the moon is the mind. And of course, it's another very common comparison is that the mind seems to be controlled by the lunar aspects, and so the mind is frequently connected to the moon. Oh, also, we should probably mention that when the ecological movement started in the end of the last century, the idea of Mother Earth and the living entity of the earth suddenly became popular again, whereas it had sort of laid dormant from these indigenous religions for a long time.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to mention before I forget that Atmavidyananda says karma yoga is not canceled.
Not canceled. All right. All right, well, we'll see who shows up. Yeah, all right. All right, so mind is that which thinks. The organ of thinking is the mind. How long do you think? So long as you do not arrive at a conclusion. Now, I'm not sure I completely agree with that, because a lot of times when you come to a conclusion, you have a lot of fun thinking about how wonderful it was to come to that conclusion and the process that you went through to get to that conclusion. But anyway, he's going to try to make the case that you think until you come to a conclusion. You see a rope and you take it to be a snake. And then you think it may be a rope. Suddenly the wind makes it move and you conclude again that it's probably, after all, a snake. But you reason that the motion may have been due to the wind, and so then your reasoning goes on until you come to what it actually is. So long as you are uncertain concerning the nature of things, you continue to think. But when you have arrived at a definite conclusion, your thinking ceases. Mind is full of all sorts of doubts. While these doubts remain, you go on thinking. When all doubts are dispelled, then knowledge comes. Thus the mind is the source of all changes, like the moon. That's another thing about the moon. Since the moon goes through phases, it's often compared to things that change and go through cycles. Of course, everything in the cosmos appears to go through cycles. The sun appears to go through daily cycles, and the moon also goes through daily cycles as well as monthly cycles, and so forth and so on. As you have perceived or pervaded this little universe of yours, this body, so this big universe is pervaded by the cosmic soul. In this cosmos, the moon sees indistinctly and the sun sees distinctly. And of course, that's referencing the idea that the moon is just reflected light, whereas the sun is the source of its own light. And so the moon is a dimmer object. But it's also often compared to something that you can actually observe directly. You can't observe the sun directly without going blind. So The moon is the way we can understand some of the light from the sun safely. And so this is why it's often thought of as a mother aspect, and the sun is the solar aspect, and the father aspect is much harder to approach, much harder to perceive. But the mother is very gracious and is easy to perceive, and we can understand things through her. All right, so just in the cosmos, the moon sees indistinctly and the moon sees distinctly, just as the microcosm mind sees indistinctly and the senses and buddhi, the determinative faculty, see clearly. Therefore, we may reasonably conclude that what sees indistinctly here corresponds to that which sees indistinctly there, that the mind corresponds to moon and the senses, and the buddhi to the sun. For example, a man comes and tells you that there is a tiger in the street, and you do not believe him. But when you go there and actually see the tiger, then you know that it is true. So the senses give you clear knowledge, just as the sun reveals all things clearly. And for this reason, we see that the sun is the eye of the cosmic soul. Now, of course, we also know that our little solar system is a microcosm of the entire cosmos, that there are trillions and trillions of suns in the universe. In fact, there are probably billions of galaxies of trillions of suns in the universe. So this is still on a rather microscopic scale compared to the whole universe. Now we are in a position to understand the solar and lunar eclipses according to the eternal science. When the mind is overpowered by earth and earthly attractions, this condition goes by the name of incontinence. When you are restless, when you want to satisfy this desire and that, when you are in search after sensual pleasure, you become incontinent. Your mind does not rest satisfied with ordinary lawful enjoyments. You pass the limits of morality, and you become guilty of incontinence. In the same way, when the earth overshadows the universal mind, the latter shares the same fate of the individual mind and becomes a prey to incontinence. This is the lunar eclipse. And what is the solar eclipse? We have a solar eclipse when the moon hides the sun from our view. And this means that the cosmic mind overshadows the cosmic senses, or overpowering them with all sorts of mind-born desires. And you can also think of these as emotions. Your emotions get carried away, is also a way of looking at the lunar aspect. But this is also the incontinence which goes by the name of Rahu. So it is Rahu who is the cause of both the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse. We see, therefore, that modern science does not really contradict our eternal science. Only modern science overlooks the living aspect. That is why there seems to be a difference. You know, it's kind of interesting that this idea of a mechanical universe really came from Newton. But interestingly enough, Newton was a very spiritual person, and you just kind of wonder sometimes what his actual spiritual thoughts were. And to do that, I suppose one would have to wade through all his Latin tomes of religious ideas. He wrote just about as much on religion as he did about science. I think he saw the beauty in the mathematical descriptions and the regularity. I think he saw that there had to be a mastermind behind the universe to have put it together in such a clockwork fashion. That was probably the way his thinking went. When we study this universal self, we see that the same 11 organs which we have in this body are also to be found in the cosmic body. Air is one organ of the universal self, water is another. So there are 5 senses and the mind. The moon, and as I have previously said, corresponds to our mind and the sun to the eye, so space is the ear, and so on. You can perhaps scarcely understand how the ear, whose function is to perceive sound, can be only a diminutive form of space, which makes up the ear of the universal self. But how does sound come into existence? By union and separation. When two things are united, as when I clap my hands, or when two things are torn apart, as when you tear a piece of cloth, and union and separation are only possible in space. Without space, no union or separation can take place, and without union and separation, no sound can exist. Now, ears are ears because they perceive sound by having the knower behind, and sound is sound because of the space, behind which also there is the knower. John Dobson gave a different explanation of that. They equated the ear with akasha, or what is sometimes referred to as space, because things separated in space will have a gravitational attraction, and your ear senses gravitational attraction. And his grandfather was a zoologist, and he had taught him that the early function of the proto-ear, you could say, in earlier organisms that didn't have a fully functioning ear was the detection of the gravitational field. And so that is the most primitive part. But this is kind of an interesting way to describe the sound. The worst idea that I've heard is that people want to make the universe out of sound. You know, they say that Om is all-pervasive and the whole world comes out of the Om. Well, that's again symbolic of vibrational energy. You can't have sound until you have a universe, so you can't make a universe out of sound. You have to have a universe to have sound. But the idea there is that it's a vibrational universe, and in order to understand that, they talk about sound. Why? Well, because sound is the most perceivable kind of vibration in the universe that we can have. We can not only hear it, we can feel it. And so they wouldn't use something like light because it was not known for millennia that light was a vibrational wave. So really sound was the best metaphor they had for vibrational energy. So again, with the nose, there can be no smell without material particles. If you want to smell, it is no use to smell water or air, because of course, sometimes of course you can perceive odors in the air, but why? Because of the earthly particles floating in it. And the same is true of water. So we see that smell belongs to the earth, and therefore, without the earth, there could be no nose, since nose has come from odor. The earth knows that it is smelling. It knows that it is smelling sweet, and when it has a bad odor, for earth has the knower behind it. Therefore, it is the nose of the spirit, universal spirit. It is not the nose which smells, but the knower being who, by means of the nose, is able to perceive odors. The earthly particles knows that it is got odor because it has the knowing being always behind it. For there is no particle which is not pervaded by that one living soul. There are innumerable sorts of earthly particles, and each one of them knows what smell it has. In the microcosm, the nose is the place where you can perceive smell. And in the macrocosm, the earthly particles is the place where the cosmic soul has the perception of smell. Here again, Dobson had the correspondence of the five elements to the five energies. And the reason they are associated with five sense organs is that the five different sense organs perceive five different kinds of energies. And your nose detects the molecular arrangements by detecting the magnetic dipole energies in the molecules. So if two molecules have same kind of magnetic structure to them, an organism will think they have a similar smell. That's how you can get artificial fragrances. If you don't want to spend the money to extract it from a natural source, you can get one from a chemical source by creating a chemical that has a similar chemical property. Take water next. Without water, there could be no taste. If you put sugar on the tongue when it is perfectly dry, that is, when there is no saliva, you will not get any taste. Only when the saliva mixes with the substance do you perceive whether a thing is sweet or bitter. So this shows that without the help of water, we will have no taste of anything, as water on the tongue enables you to know what taste is. So in the cosmic self, also water brings in the idea of taste. For this reason, we say that water is the tongue of the universal self, as the knower behind it always knows what taste it has. Again, what John Dobson would tell us is that the water is a dipolar molecule, an electrically polar molecule, which is why it is able to dissolve so many things. And when it dissolves those things, of course, then your taste buds can recognize them. But one of the primary senses is for acids, and acids are nothing but a substance that has free hydrogen ions, or hydroxide ions when it's attached to another water molecule. And that's a positive charge. And so the tongue corresponded to electrical energy. The element that is sensed by the tongue is electrical energy. In the same way, the air is the skin of the universe, the universal self. By your skin, you know what is hard to touch and what is soft, what is cold and what is hot. Now, it is the air which carries heat and which carries cold, and it gives you the idea of hardness and softness. So the air must be the skin of the universal spirit, who gets the idea of heat, cold, hardness, and softness through it. And it also, you detect heat and cold in your skin because it's kinetic energy, and so kinetic energy is what is the corresponding to that particular element, the element of air, which is really, air is not a very good translation. It should have been wind. Vayu is wind, it's not air. So it's the movement of the air that's critical there, and so it's the kinetic energy that's critical. We thus find in the universe an exact correspondence for every part of our body. The hand is presided over by Indra, for the hand is the lord of strength. When an enemy attacks you, you at once raise your hand to strike it. The hand is the storehouse of all strength. The legs, represented by Upendra, or the younger brother of Indra, Vishnu, the all-pervading one. It is from the legs we get the idea of extension by going from one place to another. It is from the legs we get the idea of extension by going from one place to another. We make out distance. I think there's a punctuation missing there. So Vishnu is the leg of the universal soul, and so on. So for some reason he's equating Vishnu with Upendra. That's beyond my understanding of these deities. Wherever there is fire burning, there is also light. There again, the translation of fire for Tejas isn't very good. Tejas is something that shines, so any kind of light is shining or Tejas, whereas, of course, Agni is the Sanskrit word for fire. So when the Greeks got these things from the Hindus, they were using examples, and sometimes the examples would get mixed up with the actual idea. So whenever there is fire burning, wherever there is light, there is the language of God. Tongue is the cause of our speech. Now, what is it we call talking? You only talk to inform others of your intention. Speech is the vehicle of your mind. If there is no talking, there is no illumination. As if there were no lamp in the room, there would be no illumination. Without language, even if I have knowledge, I could not communicate it to you. Neither you to me, and there would be only ignorance. So we see the language of Vak illumines just as the lamp illumines, and as I know that by talking I illumine, so the lamp also knows that it illumines, for there is the knower behind every particle of it. So wherever there is light, there is speech of God. As by talking you illumine others and are illumined by them, so whenever there is light, there is illumination. Hence, when the sun and the stars, etc., came into existence, God began to talk. So it's kind of an interesting analogy, but it doesn't need to be quite so convoluted. It just things that shine or light, that's all. And that's perceived by the eye, which is what Tejas is perceived by. We see, therefore, that our senses in this little body have their prototypes in the universal body of God. From those big cosmic senses of God, we have got these little senses. As from a big reservoir, many little reservoirs can be filled, so all these senses, all these little organisms have come from that vast organism, the infinite body of God. From God's infinite nose, we have got this finite nose. From God's infinite legs, we have got these finite legs. From God's infinite hands, we have got these finite hands, and so with all the senses and organs. We have the diminutive forms of the vast being, and just as looking at a little photograph, we can get we can form an idea of the person it represents. So by looking at man, we can get some idea of God. We are very small, it is true, but by analyzing some of these little gods, we can know something of what the vast God is like. When you wish to know what the ocean is like, you cannot hope to have before you the whole ocean. It is too vast. But by seeing a part of it, you can know what the whole ocean is like. God is the infinite ocean in which each person is a little wave. And just as by analyzing one portion of water from the ocean, you can get some idea of the water of which the whole ocean is composed, so by analyzing a person, you can form some idea of God. To know God, therefore, we must seek him in human beings. And what human being can one best study but his own self? Hence, if we know God, we must know him by analyzing and studying ourselves. You know, this idea of microcosm and macrocosm is also very evident in the idea of mandalas. Mandalas are considered as pictorial representations of the whole universe, and you as part of the universe. There's always a center to the mandala, and that's your bindu, that's your center, and then out from that center, and it's also the universal center, it's also Brahman. So it's both the microcosmic self and the universal self. And then it expands out into the manifest universe with all sorts of petals and triangles and circles and so forth. The circle is the best symbol for the infinite, which he will bring out here a little later. And so you see lots of circles in mandalas because that represents the infinity of being expanding out in ever increasingly large circles from the bindu. And you see lots of petals representing the unfolding, like a flower unfolds into the universe. And so there are lots of similarities there. And many symbols are thought of as being microcosmic representations of the whole cosmos. in a small form, a symbolic form. We see then that all people are miniatures or little photographs of God. But you may ask, why do all these photographs differ so much if they are all of one being? A photograph of a finite being resembles him truly, because the finite person is always clear-cut and definite, but in the photographing the infinite one, the photo must vary according to the standpoint from which it is taken. So each time you will get a different aspect. Very much like the fable of the blind folks and the elephant, where each one gets a different impression of this large animal, the elephant, because they're only touching one part. But, however, these various aspects may differ in one aspect. They all resemble that. In one aspect, they all resemble, and that is in the consciousness that's behind all of this. The same consciousness is to be found in the crow, in the tiger, in the worm, and in human beings. This one aspect is photographed everywhere. Appearances may vary, but the consciousness is the same. That consciousness is formless, and out of formless being, all forms can be manifest. As out of the formless sugar, you can make any figure you choose. God not having any definite form, all forms belong to him. That cannot be the case with a finite entity, for it has only definite shape, only its own definite shape. Hence, being formless, he has so many forms, but there must be a connecting link between the formless and the formful in order that we may compare them. That link is consciousness. In this, both agree. So the photographs of the infinite may vary in appearance, but they are all the same being having the same consciousness. And when you read any of the scriptures, it doesn't matter whether it's a Vaishnava scripture or a Shakta scripture or a Shaivite scripture, they all come down to the idea of consciousness being the essence of that particular deity, and that consciousness is all pervading. Consciousness is always one. Even the nuclear physicists came to that conclusion. Edward Schrödinger said that there is no hard evidence for the plurality of the observer, meaning a subjective consciousness. So the idea of a subjective consciousness and an individual consciousness is only subjective. It's not, there's no objective reality to it. And you come to that conclusion through quantum physics when you realize that the observer collapses the wave function, and you run into rather interesting problems if you think that any conscious entity has the ability to collapse that wave function all by itself without any interference from everybody else's consciousness. That means you could have two different people desiring to collapse the wave function differently, but that doesn't happen. It only collapses once. Consciousness is always one. How do you know this? When I say of a thing, I know it, a particular feeling comes to me. When someone else says he knows, the same feeling comes to him. Consciousness or knowledge is always accompanied by satisfaction. Unconsciousness or ignorance is always accompanied by dissatisfaction. In that feeling of satisfaction, there is no difference between a human being and the lower animals. Hence, consciousness is one. Forms may be many, and that same consciousness of conscious soul pervades all forms and makes them living. This is the teaching of our scriptures. And of course, this is why some people have the ability to read minds. They are able to tap into that cosmic consciousness in a way that allows them to see how that cosmic consciousness is manifesting in some other being. And so they are able to intuit what is in that other mind. Thus we see the old idea of the cosmos was soulful, and the modern idea is soulless. If you look towards the soul inside, you do not see differences. Modern science makes much of the form side, therefore it emphasizes differences, while the old Aryan philosophers made much of the soul side, and so they embraced unity. And so that really is an important concept, and if the world could concentrate more on our samenesses rather than our differences, we would be a lot better off. If we could perceive the whole universe as one universe, then we would realize that what's good for the universe is also good in our particular part of the universe. And by the idea of a wave, if there's a crest of a wave, there has to be a hollow somewhere else. So that's the problem with greed. Greed tends to make a great big wave in one place and a great big hollow someplace else. And that's not tying in with the idea of a whole universe being at one. You have to have the idea that if you create more suffering for other people, you're really creating more suffering for yourself, because you're supposed to be trying to identify yourself with the totality and not with just your little individuality. So these are the lessons that we get from Vedanta. So next time, not time to really start it tonight, so we'll hold off till next time. We'll take the next avatar, the Varaha avatar, which is the boar avatar, which he will explain in terms of the idea of sacrifice and how we sacrifice things to the various elements which represent different aspects of the one God in order to propitiate those particular aspects. So we will take that up next time. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om peace, peace, peace. All right, thank you all. Nice to see you.